Okay, so first of all, we're now recording. We'll actually start now. And let's talk a little about the Carter Cleaning Company, because we're going to see them and Jennifer and her father again and again each week throughout this semester. We're going to talk about them. So in the Carter Cleaning Company, what are some of the problems that they might have? So a few of you said they might have a problem with hiring. That's certainly true. They need to hire people and they only have a few people, so they need to choose the right people. Some other people said they're going to have problems with performance evaluations. How do you know if somebody's doing a good job? That's true too. Any other problems they might have besides hiring and evaluating?
It's a small family-run business. There might not be kind of, I guess, like from orientation all the way through, there's not going to be a big guidebook. You work for a large company, they're going to tell you every situation and how you should respond and what their expectation is. I know that kind of gets into evaluations, but just with a family.
So training, I'd call that training.
Looser. Training, okay.
Yeah. How do they train people? How do they onboard people, teach them the culture, teach them what to do? That's true. Any other HR issues anybody sees?
Well, I said high turnover, but that's same thing as training, I think.
Well, high turnover definitely will be a problem. Yeah. Okay. You know, so some of the problems that I perceive them having, as you said, their staffing, their performance expectations, their appraisal, coaching, feedback, compensation, what kind of benefits do they give, what kind of incentives, how do they develop their employees? All of these are going to be issues. And as we talked about last week, we pretty much put these into our 5 categories, right? Planning, organizing, staffing, leading, and controlling. So pretty much when we talk about the problems of an organization using HR, these are really the 5 categories we're talking about. And can someone tell me what are the 5 elements of staffing? Who can tell me the 5 elements of staffing?
To hire, recruit, select, I don't know.
Yeah.
Evaluating, compensating.
Good. Okay, so recruitment, selection, compensation, evaluation, and recruitment, selection, training, compensation, and evaluation. And then the additional 3 elements?
Labor relations, health, safety, and fairness.
Good, labor relations, health and safety, and fairness. So when we're talking about HR, that's really what we're talking about. And the videos for this week were primarily about the topic of law, of fairness in that sense. So let me shut this down. Okay, so let's start talking about the PPT from this week. I don't know how many of you watched the videos, but I went through it, you know, pretty quickly, not super fast. I think it was still an hour and a half, but that's a lot faster than I do law. And so I actually wanted to start this week with another activity, but I think we can come back to this because we do have a little presentation, right? Who are our 3 presenters? Yes.
Ethan, Rodrigo, and me.
Ethan, Juan, and Rodrigo.
And Rodrigo.
Okay, are you guys ready?
Yep.
Yeah, I have the PPT up here.
Great. Let me make sure I can allow you to share. Okay, it looks like you should be able to share your screen now. So it's now about 8:20. You know, keep it, as I said, under 15 minutes.
Okay.
All right. There we go. I'm actually just saving the PPT. I'll open it up as soon as it opens, and then it's just that.
Sure. You ready?
Yep. Let me just share. Alrighty. So we are starting off, we are doing the history of HRM. Obviously, we know who's doing the presentation. So to begin with, I will be talking about the prehistory to the Industrial Revolution. Then we have the Industrial Revolution to World War II and World War II to present, kind of breaking down the big divides in the evolution of HRM. So prehistory, for thousands of years, if you were going to ensure the survival of your tribe, your group of people, you had to ensure that the next people taking over your tribe, your leadership, the people contributing were trained. They knew what to do. So leadership and workforces, they've been developed and maintained for thousands of years. It's not like a new concept to have people trained and understand their roles in your society, in your group. Didn't just used to be about a business. It was about kind of your tribe, all your people. So leaders were trained from an early age, what other tribes to trust, where to hunt, who to go and rely on, what plants to eat. Everything had to be passed down from person to person. It is a form of HRM, kind of training. And hunters and gatherers, they were trained, just like I said, to ensure success. Early forms, kind of more developed, nuanced forms of HRM were careful employee selection, and then also arrangement between craftsmen and their apprentices. So found in 2000 BC to 1500 BC, the Chinese, they would screen their employees. They would ensure that they're hired the best person for their jobs. When it came to, I'm sure government jobs were a little more kind of nepotism, if I'm not mistaken, but also in the trades, which is very popular, was a huge way of life for thousands of years. So making things, clothes, tools, weapons, also getting into the ancient Greeks, same thing, but they used an apprentice system. So there'd be a master and then the apprentice. And for a long time, your apprentice would live in the home or the workshop of the master. They would be trained to ensure the quality of the work continues on after the master is gone. And while working and being trained there, the apprentices would probably receive a little bit of remuneration, and they'd also get training, they'd get the healthcare, and they'd have a place to live. They didn't have to worry about being unsafe. And then that, as the Industrial Revolution kind of took off, a lot of these small apprentice shops, people would kind of gather more into the cities, and a lot of the cotton industry, they started getting big looms, big factories, and that goes into the Industrial Revolution, where I believe Juan will take over.
Rodrigo.
Oh, Rodrigo, sorry.
Take over the Industrial Revolution. In this part, HRM wasn't really taken serious. Like nobody really knew what these terms HRM meant, because it was this part in history in which industries started running, and then there was a increase in employment, in which Asian people, like people who were in their farmings, and then they stopped doing that. They went to the cities, so they started doing this new thing that everybody was talking about in the industries. So anybody who was with the desire of working was allowed and was really welcome to work in these factories. Like I said, where people were migrating to the cities, like it was a huge increase of movement of people moving to big cities, mostly farmers, as I said, and then people who really needed an income to support their families.
Rodrigo, can I interrupt you for a second? So as everybody's noticed, the PPT isn't working. I don't know if you guys are changing the screen on the PPT,
Yeah,
but
I thought it was only me.
we're just seeing that first. We're just seeing
yeah.
the first cover screen. Right. So.
Okay, now it's good.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Please continue.
So the conditions were the worst during this time because there was nothing, like there was nobody to tell how to do things right. Most of the machines were too dangerous, in which people had to work without having any type of training. There was a slavery. Sorry, I wrote that wrong. So there was slavery, child labor, low wages, and there was no limit of working hours, it was really not good for people who wanted, but they didn't have no choice. Next slide, please, Ethan.
Ethan, you there?
Thank you. So World War One, it was like I could say like when HRM was born, but also wasn't taken serious. So in this time, employees were not expendable anymore, and by that I mean that if during Industrial Revolution, if an employee was sick, there was somebody else willing to take his spot. Because of this, there were women entering the industries during World War One because men were sent to the front. There was a lack of employment. Women had to replace their working spots no matter what it was. And still there was more and more people migrating to work, and also the lack of workers in the industries, like I said, was always replaced by women or usually by children too. So staff management was in need because there was an increase in these people, either women, children, or men that stay in the industries working for the war. So most of them were inexperienced workers. Most of them were put into the wrong jobs. Next slide, please. So it was during World War II in which there was a huge change. So I put the growth of HRM because most of the countries, industries, they learn from what happened in World War One. So most of the productions were focused on war materials. There was a reorganization of staff to produce faster. Marketing was modified so that there was a decrease in advertisement in things that were not essential to go to the war. So marketing was mostly advertising things that would help people focusing on war. Education was also changed. It was arranged to be focusing on how to win, on how to create great things that would make the war more efficient for each country. For example, like the atomic bombs that were made, like there was a huge studies on that, and they were all obligated to do that. They didn't have to focus on what their studies should be, so they just did that so that they could win war. I think it's one now. Yes.
Okay, so post World War II, after the World War, there was a systematic change in HRM. So from 1945 to 1960, the focus on workers became more crucial to business. This system of recruiting, selecting, and training emerged, and so did the job descriptions for an effective selection in personnel. Additionally to that, the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation factors improved as people's five hierarchy of needs emerged into study, being this the psychologically, safety, social, esteem, and self-actualization needs. This actually a theory from Maslow around 1940. He said this around 1943. Okay, so record keeping and reporting of personnel was a big part of during this time, and within this, technology came handy as a way to manage this information. The evolution on employee relations started as well as HRM trained personnel department. Next slide, please. Okay, so from the 60s and 70s. There was okay, wait. Give me 2 seconds. Okay. So interest in people benefited facets of business, such as, growth of market research, public relations, and communications. On these decades, managers also believed relationships between employers and employee were linked with greater productivity rather than a scientific method. An example of this was encouraging workers' ideas and initiatives as they felt more involved. So intrinsic motivations came to place. Extrinsic motivation was also pushed with increase on wages and benefits. The legislations increased the importance on HR functions. Some examples are the Equal Pay Act on 63, Civil Rights on 64, and the OSA Act on 1970, and the RIS Act on 74. And during this time, there was also a theory proposed by Douglas McGregor that stated the X and the Y. So I'm going to read that very fast. So theory X is a negative view of people that workers have little ambitions, dislike work, and want to avoid responsibility and need to be closely controlled to work efficiently. And theory Y is a positive, and it assumes workers can exercise self-direction, accept and actually seek out responsibilities, and consider work to be a natural activity. McGregor believed theory Y was best captured for workers. Next slide. Okay, so 90s and present. Throughout the 90s and beginning of the 21st century, HRM has been developed into a strategic subject where employees have become the major source of a competitive advantage for firms. For this reason, HRM is a necessity in order to handle a conducive work environment on today's corporate world, as it becomes more complex due to its fast-paced changes. Examples such as globalization and a leap into e-commerce and digital environment. To conclude, and having an overall look into HRM's history, we can see it has progressed exponentially from people being abused in slave working conditions on the early stages to the present, where they are now viewed as an important asset to business and are treated accordingly. As for HRM into the future, there is no doubt HRM will be subject to more changes as we that's Hello?
Oh, Dave, you're
Yeah, are you done? We're losing the signal. We couldn't hear you at the end.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, good job. Okay, please end the screen share.
Yep.
Great. Okay, good job. So for next week, any 3 people want to volunteer? If not, I'll just choose. Okay, then next week will be, how about Mikhail, Nicola, and Christine? Okay.
Sure. What's the topic?
The topic, let me show you. The topic will be this, ONET. So ONET is a website that is very commonly used. So next week is, what I say, Nicola, Misha, and Christine. Okay, so in HR, so the topics that we're covering this semester in our presentations usually are websites and other things that you need to understand as HR professionals. And the goal is, as I said, if when you graduate, that if you get a job as a manager, you already have some inside knowledge of how HR professionals hire people, compensate people, train people. You don't have to just, take a guess. So on the one hand, I want to prepare you guys for being workers and understanding your rights and responsibilities. On the other hand, I want to prepare you for being managers. And so one of the most important sites that we use in HR is called ONET. The website is the onetonline.org. And what I'd like from you guys next week, tell us about this. Explain it to us. Explain what is the point of this website? So you have 3 people, maybe one person explains what is this website, another, how do you use it, and another, how does it benefit you? Something like that. Any questions?
Sir, I think I told you that Christine and Crystal and me would be at the same group.
Oh, okay. Then let me change that. So instead of Christine, let me make that Jody. Okay. Nicola, Misha, and Jody.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I had that written down. Okay. So now let's talk about the lesson for today that we did on the video. We'll do Carter Cleaning Company later. What we talked about today was this idea of all these different laws that we need to understand. And really kind of this main idea here, can managers hire whoever they want? Ooh, I did not mean to stop sharing. Can managers hire whoever they want? So that's really the question. And tell us, Chloe, can managers hire whoever they want?
I guess before maybe they could, but now due to all the laws that came up like in the last decades, they cannot anymore.
Okay, so definitely, many decades ago, there were far fewer laws and managers could sort of hire whoever they wanted. They could certainly discriminate. But now with all these laws that we have, it's a lot more strict about who you can and who you can't hire. And I talked about the first case with Hooters. I don't know if all of you guys watched the video, but these are laws that are created to protect workers in general is what we're talking about. So Hooters obviously only hires women and only hires a certain type of women who look a certain way, a physical discrimination. And there was a man who sued them and they settled. So he didn't win or lose, they settled. But really the question that we get from here is it okay to discriminate sometimes?
Yeah.
So who says yes?
Sandra, when there is a business necessity, it's okay to discriminate.
So what do you mean by a business necessity?
Like, for example, like marketing purposes, when the business is like marketing for men's clothing, of course, they cannot hire women because there is an obvious necessity or something like that. Yeah.
So that's, now, that's not a BFOQ, that's a business necessity. So let's make sure we understand the difference between these two things. And I'm telling you, this will be on the final exam. Now, of course, the final exam is open book, but there will be some things on the final exam that you're going to have to explain these laws. So let's make sure you understand which laws I want you to know, since there are a lot. So we started with the Civil Rights Act 1866, and that pretty much just said you can't discriminate. This was really focused on race, on black and white, and it did create these two ideas, disparate treatment and disparate effect. So let's make sure we understand these two ideas first, disparate treatment and disparate effect. Then we'll make sure we understand this BFOQ and business necessity. Those are 4 things you really need to understand today, because the laws, you can just bring the PPT to the final exam. And a lot of these laws are pretty clear, but we need to understand disparate treatment and disparate effect. Let's start there. So what is the difference between these two? Who can explain the difference between disparate treatment and disparate effect?
Disparate treatment is
Yes. Who is speaking?
someone else. Go ahead, Camila, you can talk.
Okay, so I was just saying disparate treatment is like direct discrimination. Let's say for color skin, so you would rather hire someone that's black rather than someone that's white, so that's disparate treatment. While disparate effect is when you didn't mean to discriminate the person, but actually it came as an effect of your like selection, probably.
Okay. Okay, so disparate treatment is discrimination on purpose. Another way to say that would be intentional. Disparate treatment, right? Disparate treatment is intentional discrimination. Is that clear to everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, and when we say discrimination, it's not necessarily just about color. It could be about a lot of different things.
Oh, sir.
Yeah.
I heard the other day I was reading an article and I saw there was like a cafe in Australia, a feminist cafe in Australia that would how do you say it? Would sell coffee like 18% more to guys. Like they would tax 18% more to guys. That would be
Okay.
a disparate treatment.
Yes, because they're intentionally choosing a group of people and treating them differently and worse. So that would be intentional discrimination. Disparate effect is accidental. It's still discrimination, but it's accidental. And usually it happens when there's some sort of test or policy in the organization, and that test or policy, it just affects one group differently than another group, but it's not their intention to do that. So that's the first thing we need to understand, is the difference between disparate treatment and disparate effect. Okay, so disparate treatment versus disparate effect, as I said, disparate treatment is intent to discriminate. Disparate impact, or you could say effect, is you did not intend to discriminate. However, there was some sort of employment practice. And the example I used in the video was word of mouth. So if my company has mostly people of one group, and then I tell them, hey, just tell your friends that we're looking for more people. Well, that's not necessarily fair, because then if all of the people who work in my company are Chinese, and I say, hey, just tell your friends, well, they tell their friends who are all Chinese, and then I just get more and more Chinese people, and then a group of white people could say, hey, you're discriminating against us. And I would say, well, it's not on purpose, but it doesn't matter if it's on purpose, according to the Civil Rights Act 1866. So now the next thing to make sure we understand is, what's the difference between this BFOQ and business necessity? So can someone tell me, what is BFOQ, bona fide occupational qualification? And how is that different from business necessity?
Bona fide occupational qualification is when the essence of the business would be undermined if the business were to stop discriminating against certain people. Like, for example, in the case of Hooters, if they stop hiring the type of women that they do, I don't remember.
The essence of the business requires discrimination, okay?
Yes, and if they stop discriminating against certain people, the business wouldn't make sense anymore. Like, for example,
Okay.
when Hooters hired men, or like not the type of women that they do hire, they wouldn't be known for what they are known for.
Sure, and if I have a dance club and I hire young men and women who are sexy to dance, well, if I didn't hire them and I hired old fat people, nobody's going to come to my dance club. My business will fail. Could an old person in their 60s dance? Sure, they could, but it's necessary for my business that I discriminate. If I have a movie, yes.
So, remember in the US there was like a big scandal with like this cake company refusing to bake a cake for like a gay couple. Could they argue the, bona fide occupational qualification for refusing to make him a cake? Well, I mean,
so well, tell us
like
first what is.
Thing, but...
So tell us first, what is bona fide occupational qualification?
So I know it's like just an HR thing, but could they argue that like?
But please explain it to us first, so we're all talking about the same thing.
So they require some discrimination against certain groups, right? So I know it's against employees, I assume, and hiring someone, but could they argue that about customers too?
Well, so with BFOQ, we're not talking about, is it right to hire this person? If I have a dance club, for example, should I hire young people or old people? Could old people dance? Sure, they could. But the essence of my business is young, attractive people. So that's a business necessity. BFOQ asks the question, can this person do the job? Because you can discriminate if they physically can't. This would be the case of the fire department or the police department having a strength test. Does it discriminate against people who are weak? Sure, but they can't do the job unless they're strong. You can discriminate in some jobs based on height or weight or strength, but not based on, so actually these are examples of business necessity. I should change that. So your example of a company that says, or a bakery that says, we refuse to bake a cake for a gay couple. We believe in whatever we believe and we do not want to bake a cake. Can they physically bake a cake? Do they have the physical ability to do that?
Yeah.
Sure. So they cannot use a BFOQ defense because they physically could. Is it absolutely necessary for their business, the essence of their business? That's a different question. If they called themselves, whatever they call themselves, born again cakes, or Christian cakes, or, Bible cakes, or whatever they call themselves, and their entire business is centered around, we follow these particular beliefs or religious rules. Now, in that sense, sure, they might be able to argue. Now, the problem is this is very specific discrimination, which comes up against the Discrimination Act of 1991 and Title VII. So there's a very good chance they would lose that case anyway, because they're really not going to be able to prove it's an absolute necessity, that they would lose 100% of their business and completely go out of business if they made a cake for a gay couple. It's unlikely that even if they won in the past, going forward in the future, it's unlikely the courts will look at it that way. Okay, the next law, now that we understand those, was the FLSA. Now the FLSA, what I need you to understand is the difference between exempt and non-exempt. So can you tell me the difference between those two terms? Who can tell me that? How about Chandra? Can you tell me the difference between exempt and non-exempt?
Okay, so exempt is like position like you, or like lawyer, professors, or some people who get the more they work, the more money they earn. So they don't really have to worry about like minimum wages or something. But non-exempt is like all the workers who are covered by minimum wages. Like they need, yeah.
So in HR, we usually don't say like blue collar or white collar or high pay or low pay. We don't use words like that. What we say is exempt or non-exempt. When we're talking about jobs in HR, we might say, oh, this is an exempt job. What we mean is that's a professional level, executive level, not hourly minimum wage type job. We would not usually in HR say, oh, this is kind of a, it's an easy job, it's minimum wage. We wouldn't really say that. We would say this is a non-exempt job. But what we really mean by that is it's pretty much an hourly job. Maybe if you went to high school, that's enough. Maybe you don't even have to go to high school. You know, education is not a part. When we say the Carter Cleaning Company uses unskilled labor, Harry, when we say the Carter Cleaning Company uses unskilled labor, is that exempt or non-exempt?
Exempt.
Non-skilled labor.
Also non-exempt.
Right. So when we're talking about exempt, usually we're talking about, you know, skilled labor, somebody who went to university or is a lawyer or a doctor, an architect, somebody who's skilled. But it is not politically correct or appropriate to say some people are skilled and some people are not. So we don't say that. We say exempt and non-exempt. And the FLSA covers a lot of rules, but the big one is minimum wage. Minimum wage and overtime. Okay, minimum wage and overtime are the two really big things that the FLSA covers. So do I get minimum wage and overtime? No, I don't, but I don't need it. I might work, you know, 100 hours a week because I have a good job, you know, and I get paid to do that. If I'm a lawyer, a doctor, an architect, a teacher, a professor, anything like that. If you work, this is to protect people who work hourly, right? We got to make sure that they don't get used or abused by the boss. Okay, next was the Equal Pay Act. Who does the Equal Pay Act cover?
Women.
Women, okay? And it just says women and men must be paid the same. But it must involve either equal work or comparable work, equal or comparable. And I said those two are things we're going to talk about later. But what's the difference between equal and comparable? Well, equal means the same, the exact same job. Okay, I'm a teacher of English and the woman is a teacher of English. I'm a teacher of law, the woman is a teacher of law, the exact same job. Comparable is where we use a point system. And with the point system, every job has a certain amount of points. And you get these points, and we'll talk about this later in the semester, how do we figure out the points? But it's based on your responsibility, how many hours you work, how many people are you responsible for, how much money do you bring into the company, how much training do you need, how much professional knowledge do you need, how many years of experience do you have. All of these things give you points. So that's how we compare two totally different jobs. In the video, I talked, for example, about my job versus Eling's job. Totally different jobs. You really can't compare what we do, but you could compare the number of points we have. How many people are we responsible for? How much training do we have? How much education do we have? And then we'd get some points and we'd figure out the comparable worth. Next was Title VII. Who can tell me a little about Title VII? How about Christopher? Can you tell me a little about Title VII? You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So the employers cannot discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So it's like the Civil Rights Act.
That's reading to me. I can read. Okay, why did they create Title VII if they already had the Civil Rights Act from, was it 1866? Why bother creating another one?
Well, I didn't read that one, but I know that it definitely did not, up until the 60s, I think race was not covered, right?
Race and color were the only things that were covered.
In the Civil Rights Act from the 1800s?
Yes.
Oh, so then I guess religion and sex.
Right, so pretty much the point was everything else. Okay. Right, so religion, gender, national origin, this idea, and we have this on the bottom of the screen, this idea that you cannot classify employees in any way that would deprive them of opportunities. And that's really the big idea of Title VII, that it's not about race or color or religion, it's about any classification. People who are tall, people who are short, people who are bald, people who are fat, people who are Men, people who have facial hair, people who wear glasses. It doesn't matter. You cannot classify employees in any way. Race, color, religion, gender, those are just examples. But the 1964 Act, we just call it Title VII. Title VII really opened things up. That's one big important thing I need you to know. That Title VII expanded this idea of true, you cannot discriminate. That's one thing it did. The other thing it did is it created the EEOC. Christine, can you tell us what's the EEOC? You're muted.
Sorry. The Equal Employment Occupation, something?
Opportunity Commission.
Opportunity Commission. It's like a group of members. They have also like 1,000 employees, but basically they kind of just investigate like discrimination in companies and stuff like that, and they bring it to court if they feel like it needs to.
Okay, so they are part of Title VII. So EEOC is this organization, a government department with thousands and thousands of employees. They are part of this act, Title VII. And what they do is they enforce the law. So in the 1866 Act, it said you can't discriminate, but I mean, come on, if you do discriminate, the government's not going to do anything to help you. It was just a law on paper. Nobody followed it. So the other thing that Title VII did is it actually created a way to enforce the law. It created this group called the EEOC. And the EEOC's job is to investigate discrimination complaints. It can try to settle. It can actually take the business to court and sue them. So this was a really big difference. So Title VII covers every kind of discrimination and now says, if you discriminate, we're going to sue you. The government will sue you. And they have thousands and thousands of employees. And if you complain to the government, they will investigate. So this was a huge difference. Okay, next was the Age Discrimination Act of 1967. Could someone tell me what age did that protect?
Over 40 years old.
Over 40. Okay, good. So the Age Discrimination Act protects people who are over 40. The main reason that they did that is before that law, people were forced to retire. When they were 55 or later than 65, they were forced to retire. So the government created this law in 1967 called the Age Discrimination Act, which says you cannot treat people who are older than 40 differently. You can't force them to retire. And as I said in the video, it protects discrimination even when both people are over 40. So, you know, in the example was, let's say you work at a company and you reject Hillary for a job. You didn't know her age, but she's 54, and you hire Alvin, who's 42. Hillary was qualified, but you felt that Alvin was better. Can Hillary sue for age discrimination? Even though you hired someone who was over 40, can she still sue?
Yeah.
Yes, she can. So it doesn't matter if they're both over 40. She could still sue if she thinks that you did not hire her because of her age.
Hey, David?
Yes.
What if they're like super old and actually can't do their job?
Okay, well, let's start by defining what super means in the phrase super old. You mean like 200?
Like 100.
Like 100. So you're talking about two 100-year-old people who can't do their job.
Well, only if it's just one. Like one.
Just one. You can 100% fire people if they are too old and can't do their job.
Oh, okay.
Not being able to do your job is not really dependent on age. You can fire someone at any time if they can't do their job.
Okay.
If somebody is too old, then it also does depend on the job. Like if they couldn't be a driver or a pilot. If they're a lawyer and they start forgetting things, they could be summarily dismissed. They could be fired for that. Any job where it's really important that you have your mental faculties, you could be let go for being unable to do the job, sure. Okay, next I wanted you to know was OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act. OSHA was very, very important because it really in 1970 brought this idea of that employers need to be responsible for the safety of the employees. You need equipment, goggles, masks, gloves, fire stations. You need to protect the employees. You need smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, nets, ropes, hard hats, just this whole giant area of safety equipment.
Does that include health insurance?
No, it does not. It makes sure that you are safe on the job. So that I need to make sure you wear a helmet or you wear goggles or things like that.
For example,
on the job.
COVID pandemic, would testing and masks be part of regulations of OSHA?
If the entire government came to an agreement that the COVID pandemic was a serious health issue, then maybe it would be. But because the executive branch of the government kind of refuses to acknowledge that, there's still this political battle as to whether this is a real safety risk.
So, and the US, people don't get tested regularly in the office for COVID?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
I don't know anybody who gets tested regularly at all. I tried to get a test in Manhattan. It took 12 days to get my results. So I don't know anybody who gets tested. Nope, definitely not part of OSHA right now. For the same reason that getting a flu shot in flu season is not part of OSHA. That's not related to the job. Being at the job might increase your risk, but it's not related to the job. I have to protect against things that are related to the job. So if you're painting, I need to make sure that you have a mask to protect against the paint fumes because I'm providing the paint. Then we talked a little. Yes.
Yeah. So what happens if, for example, an employee hurts himself even though it has the safety working conditions?
So let's say that we're talking about construction, for example, and I provide you with the helmet, I provide the ropes, I provide the nets, I have all the safety equipment, but you still get hurt. That happens all the time. So there's two things that happen. One of them is called workers' compensation. So when you pay taxes in America, and most countries have some form of workers' comp, when you pay taxes, part of your money goes to this. So if you're hurt on the job during work hours, you automatically get a payment through workers' compensation. Then if you need additional money, that's where you might use the law and you might try to sue the boss or sue the company, or there would be insurance. So as a company, I would have insurance for my construction agency, my construction company, and the insurance would pay you. So you really have three ways to get your money: workers' compensation, insurance, and suing.
Okay.
Okay. So then we talked a little about affirmative action. And I gave this example that in China, people from smaller towns, they get a higher score to begin on the Gaokao. And is this fair? That this is a form of discrimination, but it is affirmative action. So Camila, what is affirmative action?
I'm not quite sure, but affirmative action was, I don't remember.
Anybody remember what's affirmative action?
That's just hiring people from underrepresented groups, whether different race or
sure. For what purpose?
It's to equalize like mistakes from the past or maybe situations that have led to a disparate outcome.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's not heavily slanted towards white males like it was in the past.
Sure. So having hiring or university admissions or a variety of policies that improve the chances for people from disadvantaged groups in order to try to equalize the situation. Because in the past, it probably was not fair. It was almost definitely slanted towards white men. So in order to try to fix that, to take people, and that's, you know, it's a whole discussion as to whether or not it's right or wrong. I don't want to get into the discussion of that. I just want you to know what it is. Let's do two more, and then let's do an activity. So the next law that I needed you to know was the Vocational Rehabilitation Act. This is 1973. And this also gives us a few vocabulary words that we really do need to know. So one of these words is accommodation, and one is undue hardship. And I'd like you to know these words. So can somebody tell me what is a reasonable accommodation?
Ramps.
Sorry?
Ramps for wheelchaired people. People in
Okay, well,
wheelchairs.
that's an example of a reasonable accommodation. Can you give me sort of a definition?
It's taking all the necessary steps to make people with disabilities, to make everything accessible to people with disabilities in the office.
Sure. Okay, so allowing whatever steps need to be taken so that people with disabilities can participate. And it could be a ramp for people with a wheelchair. It could be widening a doorway for people with a wheelchair. It could be having bathrooms where you push a button to open the door. It could be having books or computers that are used braille so blind people can do it. You know, it could be changing office hours so that if you have some need that you need to go see a doctor or something in the mornings, maybe you don't start until the afternoon. And that would be something that would allow people with a disability to participate equally. So what is an undue?
Sorry.
Sorry?
Would an example of accommodation be, you know, breastfeeding stations or breastfeeding rooms?
Yes. Yes. Once the Pregnancy Act was passed, and that's the next one, but in 1978, when they said pregnancy is a disability, at that point, yes, a breastfeeding station, not childcare though.
Why not? Like,
because that's not part of pregnancy.
Okay, but when you mean childcare, do you mean like they don't have like daycares inside the office?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because once you have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old child, we're not talking about pregnancy anymore. So what's an undue hardship? That's another reason we don't have childcare in businesses, is it would be an undue hardship to have every business have daycare.
A financial pressure, like to do the accommodate processes, like it puts some financial pressure on companies, so it's not really effective for them.
Sure.
At what point does hardship become undue? Like, is there a percentage or?
No, it's a legal question. And so what happens is somebody might sue your company and say, you know, they would go through this law and they would contact the government and they would say, I believe my company is not making a reasonable accommodation for my disability. And then you would be brought into a hearing. It wouldn't be a formal court, but it would be a hearing. And you would explain, listen, I can't do that. It's going to bankrupt me. And what you would have to bring is some sort of evidence, a quote from a contractor or a construction company or something saying, this is how much it would cost to fix things so that this person with the disability could participate equally.
What if it just shows you like having like, I don't know, a bad quarter? Because it's a really small company, I mean, obviously, but not like bankrupt. You know, does this depend on how good your lawyer is?
It's at the discretion of the hearing, whoever's running the hearing.
Okay.
But you can always appeal. just like law. You can always appeal to court if you think it's unfair. Okay, let's do a little activity before we take a break. And I said we would do this before. Oh, Pregnancy Discrimination Act, last one, is just to make it clear, pregnancy is a disability. Is that a bad thing to say? I mean, it sounds kind of bad. Chloe, is that bad to say? Pregnancy is a disability? I think if you went around saying that, people would be pretty unhappy.
I think it is. It's
kind of disability because like it's temporary. So it's okay to say that.
Okay, it's temporary, but it affects your major life functions. So we consider it a disability. Okay.
Why is childbirth included? It's not like they're going to have the children at the office.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Why is childbirth included? Like, why is it pregnancy and childbirth that are treated as disabilities? Because childbirth doesn't naturally occur at the office.
Because you're going to be taking time off.
Okay.
So it's still related to the job.
David?
Yes.
Do people, is it possible to fire a pregnant woman, or will you always get sued?
No, it depends what you're firing her for. Are you firing her because she stole from your company?
No,
or
like
because
she's like, if she does something related to being pregnant, like if she goes crazy or something.
Okay, well, I think we need to clarify that pregnant people don't go crazy automatically. So if she
like starts throwing stuff and being really emotional.
I don't know what you think pregnancy is like, but
I don't know, my
let's say
he got pretty mad a lot.
I'll give you a more reasonable example. Sometimes when a woman is pregnant, she becomes extraordinarily sensitive to smells. Now imagine that she comes into the office and this does happen sometimes. One of the other people in the office wears a perfume, and now that this woman is pregnant, it makes her sick to her stomach. She gets sick, she throws up to be around this perfume. Could we force the person who wears the perfume to not wear it anymore? You couldn't really force her, but kind of yes. You could not fire a pregnant woman. Now, as you said, if she starts throwing things and breaking things, sure. Being pregnant is not an excuse to go break a window.
Okay.
Sure, that's still bad behavior. Now, this gets into an area of court cases that are where people use pregnancy as an example of insanity. So there are court cases, just very briefly, let me explain this and then we'll go back. There are court cases where people say, usually there are four reasons for insanity. One is, I'm crazy, right? That's just insanity. I don't know the difference between right and wrong. Number two, some sort of drugs, right? You took some sort of drugs or you were given drugs, and that includes something that a doctor gave you. So for example, there's a famous case of a woman who took Ambien. If you know what that is, it's a sleeping pill. It's not supposed to get you high, but when people take the sleeping pill, sometimes they forget what they did. She took 2 of them and then got in her car and says she doesn't remember. She drove across America for like 6 hours and then killed, I think it was her ex-husband's new wife or something. She killed them and drove back. We're talking like 15 hours or something. And she said she didn't remember, she was insane. So it doesn't have to be that you did a sort of a drug. It could be a medicine. Another reason that people sometimes give for insanity is staying up for too long. If you stay up more than 72 hours without sleeping, you can be considered legally insane, depending on what you do. And the fourth reason would be anything related to ovulation. So women have actually committed crimes and then said it's because I had my period, and during my period I go crazy. Oh, people have committed crimes and said
it. Doesn't go back to like hysteria, right? Remember when like it was called hysteria before?
Yes, we do not call it hysteria anymore.
Yeah, we just kind of, yeah.
Hysteria was just what they called women needed to have orgasms. And that's how they
No,
solve
I think
hysteria.
it's how they
We
cure it.
still have, there's still a medical procedure called a hysterectomy. So hysterectomy is when the ovaries are removed, but we don't use the word hysteria anymore. We accept that there are
stem from like the same.
Well, but now we're getting into
practice.
historical discussions that are not relevant. You know, all I'm trying to say is that no, to answer Christopher's question, if a person does something illegal or violent or destructive, they can be fired regardless of their situation. However, pregnancy is seen as a disability like any other disability, and accommodations do need to be made. That's all I'm really trying to say with that. Okay, let's do one group exercise before we take our break. And that is, I'd like to do a moot court. So I'm going to put you in groups, and I'm going to say I'd like one or two of you to be a lawyer for the plaintiff, one or two of you to be a lawyer for the defendant, and one or two of you to be the judge. And I'm going to give you a case. So here's the first case. Okay, and so here's the first case. So in your group, plaintiff, you represent somebody who applied for a job with the company. Let's say it's my company, David's company. And the job involves a lot of physical labor, but very few skills. And you represent someone who didn't go to high school. Defendant, you represent me, David's company. We have a rule that if you want to be hired, you have to go to high school. That's it. So I say, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to hire you because you didn't go to high school. That's it. And I want to know, is that reasonable? This job, by the way, is a job where you shovel coal. That's the job, shoveling coal. And I say you had to go to high school. And I'd like you to take a minute and try to argue whether or not this person should be allowed to be hired. Okay, the rooms are now open. I'll give you like a minute to discuss it, minute or two.
Is there a reason they didn't go to high school?
Family, life situation.
Okay, but they wanted to.
Maybe.
Oh, you want to be the plaintiff? Okay, sure.
No, I don't want to be the plaintiff. I thought.
I can be the plaintiff.
No, we don't know yet.
We need 2 lawyers for each, right?
Are we defendant or the plaintiff?
I'll be the plaintiff. I need one more.
Okay, so let's say Christopher and Nicola, you represent who?
Plaintiff.
Plaintiff, fine. Christopher and Nicola, you represent plaintiff. And Juan and Bella, you represent defendant.
Sorry, a minute. Sorry, a minute. Someone is at the door.
Okay, great. Juan and Misha, you represent the defendant. So plaintiff, I want you to argue that it doesn't matter that this guy didn't go to high school. And Misha, it does matter.
Well, I was wondering about the specifics of the Affirmative Action Act, because that's usually for schooling, right? But couldn't we use it as we could basically say, well, he comes from a low income, his family situation was bad, and basically the affirmative action's purpose was to help people in his situation.
Does it matter?
Yeah,
well,
but
I don't know the specifics of the act, but if it applied to someone out of high school or who didn't go to high school, I definitely think it would. But I don't know who it specifically applies to.
I think in that case, it's like, doesn't matter if the guy went to the high school or not, because the occupation is just shove, right? Or dig something. So
We
he
could say
probably
that-
have the technical skills, to do the labor, but when the firm create this kind of, I think it's like a kind of discrimination with him, they create a kind of law to discriminate people so they can choose higher.
Okay, I understand.
So
And
differentiate people.
Juan or Misha, how would you respond to that?
Well, I could say it's just a policy of our company, and it's not any discrimination against him. It's just a policy we have.
I would say that it's the same with someone who says, well, we're not going to hire Black people. They can just say that's a policy, but I would say that it breaks the Civil Rights Act.
But I mean, it doesn't though.
Because you're
Black people
choosing
are
something to discriminate on.
yeah, but it's something that, you know, everybody can get. You can't really change your race. You can't.
Job which requires certain degree of like university or like, but we don't know what if David company is like just like digging holes or just maintenance, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have a like require some educational background.
You wouldn't need an education, but I think most jobs require like soft skills. You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to get along with your employer, your other employees.
Yeah.
You need, and as I said, with high school, showing you finished high school is the bare minimum of decency and showing that you are committed to something. If you can't finish something in like high school,
are you guys done?
No. We've talked about the plaintiff side. Now we're just doing the defendant.
Who's representing the defendant?
Me and Rodrigo.
Okay, so can one of you guys make an argument?
Well, I guess the rule, it should be for everyone. Otherwise, you some discrimination. So that's one good reason why he was not accepted to do the job.
Why would you say it's not discrimination?
Because it's for everyone. All the workers, all the employees should fit to that rule. So.
Okay. Are there any benefits to having gone to high school?
Yes, but not in this case.
Okay.
I don't think you need a high school degree to be able to poke hole into a bullet.
You don't. You're right. But this is my company. And if this guy is good, and when I say good, I don't mean good at shoveling. I mean good. He shows up on time. He's respectful. He's polite to people. People like him. He gets along with people. Then I might think about promoting him, right? Are there any skills that you learn in high school that might be important if you got promoted?
Right?
Maybe.
I think it goes beyond that. I think it's about social skills. That would be my argument, that this is my company. And listen, those are 4 years where you learn to deal with people. You learn to deal with people you like, people you don't like, teachers, bullies. It's society training.
And I think as a response, the plaintiffs could say that all these things can be learned on the job. These social skills.
Exactly. That's a very good response. Okay, let me close these rooms so we can all talk about it together. Okay, so that was good. Good job. I heard a lot of good things. In general, you know, the argument for the plaintiff is pretty clear, right? You don't need an education to shovel coal. And therefore, this is a discriminatory rule. That's the argument. And the argument for the defendant, I liked what I heard, that generally the reason that this company has a rule that says you have to go to high school is not really about shoveling coal. It's about the social experience of going to high school and how this makes you a more well-rounded person in case you get promotions or you go up in a company. That why isn't it legitimate for me to say? And I think that is a legitimate argument. But what the court said in this case, okay, this case was Griggs v. Duke Power, one of the very first cases in 1971 to use the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the EEOC. So the plaintiff, Mr. Griggs, applied for a job with this company, Duke Power, and they rejected him because he didn't go to high school. And what the court said is, no, this is a violation. This is discrimination. Why? Number one, he was discriminated against. Number two, was it job related? And what the company said is what you guys said. Well, you know, yes, it's job related, not for shoveling coal, but for all of the other things you need to do in a work environment. And what the plaintiff said is, yeah, but we can learn that at work. Going to high school doesn't make you polite or make you social. Some people learn that, some people don't. You can learn that in the world. And the burden of proof is on the employer. Somebody explain that to me. What does that mean? The burden of proof is on the employer.
The employer has to prove that going to high school is necessary.
So Christopher, say that again, please.
The employer has to prove that it's necessary to have a high school education.
Okay. So the burden of proof means who has to prove it was discrimination. So if the burden of proof is on the employer, then the company has to prove they didn't discriminate. Does Mr. Griggs, the plaintiff, have to prove anything?
No.
No. He just has to prove that, here, number one, discrimination took place. Did discrimination take place? Yes. They didn't hire him because he didn't go to high school. That's all he needs to prove. And then, and this was a big thing that Title VII did, then it shifts over to the employer, and the employer needs to prove they didn't discriminate. That's hard to prove. And so they didn't prove it, and they lost. Okay. Let's take a little break now.
David, can I make a question? Just
you can.
So in that case, the company lost, so they hired the guy?
Correct.
So, but it's not kind of like strange or you know, you hire someone that sue you?
Awkward.
Awkward.
Okay, so
yes, like
okay, you make a good point. And we talk about this law and more in law class. When you sue a company, obviously it's very uncomfortable to go and then work for the company, right? So you don't need to. He could have just gotten money, but he wasn't just suing for himself. So he, Mr. Griggs, he didn't have a lot of money. He was trying to get a job shoveling coal. You know, he didn't really sue them. The group, even though he was the plaintiff, this company was sued on his behalf by a big civil liberties union, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. They sued the Duke Power Company, you know, to represent the rights of workers, to represent all workers who didn't go to high school. So really, it wasn't about Mr. Griggs. He really had no problem with the company. Of course, he was part of this, but the company was forced to hire a whole group of people. He was just one of them. So he didn't sue them personally.
I see.
Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break, and then we will come back.
the mothers probably don't have anyone to take care of the children, they won't be employed because maybe they will need to take some time off or to do like part-time or something, and maybe it bothers the owners.
Chloe, is that a sexist question?
Yes, because they were not asked to men, only women.
Okay.
So
I
it's
mean,
part of the
this is not very different from saying, you know, how does your boyfriend feel about you working? Will he let you work? It's not very different from asking that kind of sexist question. Who's going to take care of your kids when you're at work? It has a lot of other meanings, you know, implying that your job as a woman is to take care of the children, which is a very sexist implication. So you can't ask anything about, you know, children or pregnancy. Can I ask in an interview, can I ask if you're married?
No.
Why not?
That's
I think
It's like
Because it's
it's like you ask.
unrelated to the job.
Okay, Chandra, can I ask if you're married in an interview?
No, I don't think that's right.
Why not?
What if you ask?
Because it's not really related to like be hired, like whether I get
Okay.
married or something.
It's not related
but
to the
like-
job.
But if the job requires the woman like travel a lot and so on, so maybe if she's married, it can interrupt.
Oh, Nicola,
something.
are you implying that a woman who's married isn't allowed to travel a lot?
No. It can happen not only with woman, but
The
also
chain
with
between her
men's.
wrist and the oven isn't long enough for her to travel?
I'm just trying to be more polemic.
Does she need her husband's permission to travel? For the same
I
reason
need
that
my
you would
wife's
never,
permission to travel.
for the same
Just for
reason
me.
that you
It's
could
over
never ask a man, you would never ask a man, does your wife allow you to travel for this job? You'd never ask that. You could never ask a woman that either. It is not our business. You know, if the woman says she can do the job, she can do the job. We're not allowed to ask anything like that. Nothing about children or family or marriage. What if I just said, are you single? Anais, why not?
No.
That's even worse.
I think it's the same thing. You can't ask if they're single. If
Yeah,
they're
I
married.
can't ask anything except about your abilities to do this job. What about these other questions about asking minority applicants about arrest records? Isn't that okay? I mean, I want to know if you were arrested. Anais, why is that not okay?
It's I think it's kind of like racial profiling. You know, if you ask minorities if they have like arrest records and stuff, it's kind of like putting them in certain boxes.
Sure. In America, somebody might have been arrested just for being black. You know, driving while black. Right? So to ask a minority about, now look, if it's related to the job, if it's, for example, if it's a job for an accountant who handles a large sum of money, could I ask, have you ever been arrested for a financial crime? Sure.
Yeah, because it's
As long as I ask everybody. You know, as long as I'm not targeting minorities. Any other questions? No, that was okay. The sexual discrimination thing. Do you think the manager should be fired?
100%.
Well, I was talking with our group, and I don't know. I was giving some points regarding the situation. For example, if he implied the socializing, he was not directly, harassing, but it was some form of, getting to the act. And I would say not firing right away, but maybe they could give like sexual harassment indications within the company, state that there are some certain rules you don't cross the line in certain in the job.
Look, I understand your point. However, he said, I will fire you if you don't go out with me. And I think that changes everything.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if he said to his employee, if he said to his employee, listen, I think you're attractive and I'd like to go out with you, maybe I wouldn't fire him and I would say training is required. You can't talk to people at work like that. It's going to make people uncomfortable. But he actually asked for a quid pro quo. So let's make sure we understand this stuff about sexual harassment, because this is quite important. Okay, everybody can see my screen?
Yeah.
Good. So there were a couple of other things we didn't get to. The ADA is very similar to the Disability Act from, was it 1973, was it? Disabilities Act, the previous one was, 1973. Very similar, it just makes it stronger. That's all it really did. All you need to know about the ADA is that it's the same thing in terms of you need to make reasonable accommodations unless there's an undue hardship. And I said in the video, the ADA adds one very important thing to disability. Anybody remember what that is?
Mental impairments.
Correct. So now, what does disability mean? It means physical or mental. Anything that substantially limits one or more major life activities. That could include ADD, ADHD, insomnia, depression, bipolar, any of those things that were not covered in 1973. Those weren't even words. There was no such thing as bipolar in 1973. So now in 1990, the ADA covers all these different types of disabilities. Okay, so I want you to know that. And then I want you to know the Civil Rights Act of 1991. And the reason that's different, it still has the disparate treatment and disparate effect. It still has those two. It still has BFOQ and business necessity. The only way this is different is it makes it easier to sue for discrimination. Okay, it makes it a little bit easier to sue. And this is where we got the 4/5 rule, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it says the plaintiff only has to show two things. One, that there is discrimination, that discrimination happened. And two, that something at work caused the discrimination. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter if it was fair or equal, as long as there was discrimination. Then, again, this burden of proof, the burden of proof now shifts to the company. And now the company has to prove that they did not discriminate. So if somebody sued, like in the case we just looked at in the Carter Cleaning Company, there was this guy who was, 73 years old? Yes, 73. And he said that they were discriminating against him. Now, if he wants to sue the company for discrimination, he could use Title VII. Now, this is the kind of question I'm going to ask you in the final exam. How would he sue? What laws could he use? He could use Title VII. What else could he use?
Discrimination.
The Age Discrimination Act 1967. What else could he use?
Was he disabled?
No, but he could use the Civil Rights Act 1991.
Title VII.
Yeah, he could use three. He could use Title VII, the Age Discrimination Act, or this one, the Civil Rights Act 1991. Those would be the three laws that he could use.
Fair labor standard.
I'm sorry? Fair labor, the FLSA? No, that's about how many hours you can work and minimum wage.
All right.
Can you explain
That's not really relevant. Okay, so we already talked about these pre-employment questions, right? It has to be related to performing the specific job. Now, if this guy sues for age discrimination, he could argue the 4/5 rule. Okay, we talked about that in the video. And that's if 4/5 of a group of people were given an opportunity and only 1/5 was not, that's automatic discrimination. Now, if he argues the Age Discrimination Act or Title VII or something, he would be arguing Let me ask Jody. In this age discrimination case, would he be arguing disparate treatment or disparate effect? In the age discrimination, would he be arguing that he was intentionally discriminated against, or that it was a policy for everybody?
I would say it's disparate treatment.
Sure, because he's saying that they discriminated against me because I'm 73 years old. Now, what would disparate effect be? Maybe they have a policy that says nobody over 65. Or they have a policy that says you must do a strength test. And of course, he's 73, he's going to fail that test. And they say, hey, we're not saying that it's about your age, we're just saying you didn't pass the strength test. That would be disparate effect. And we understand who has the burden of proof. Who has the burden of proof?
The employer.
The employer. And Bella, what does that mean, that the employer has the burden of proof?
This means the employer can either argue that this was not related, or this was not, it was an essence of the business. So he has to prove that he was not discriminating. I mean, he was discriminating, but it was necessary.
So the business has the responsibility to prove that the discrimination was acceptable, right?
Yes.
And there are two ways the business can prove that. What are the two ways?
The essence of the business.
Which is called?
The business necessity.
Okay, or?
And the BFOQ.
And what does BFOQ mean?
It means the person cannot physically do the job.
Okay, and that's good. That's the only way that this business could protect themselves. Otherwise, they would have to, they couldn't discriminate against this 73-year-old man. They couldn't just pay him less, for example, because they want him to quit. So if you want to sue your company for discrimination, whether it's because they asked you a question that was not appropriate, or they discriminated because you're a woman, or your color, or your age, or anything, what do you need to prove? Well, there's this McDonnell-Douglas test. Tells us what you need to prove if you want to sue your business. And it's three things. Number one, you have to prove a prima facie case of discrimination. Prima facie just means on the face. And that means you just need to prove that discrimination happened. You don't need to prove why. You just have to prove it happened. So for example, let's say that I have a company and Chloe, you come to me and you apply for a job. And I say, I'm sorry, Chloe, that's, we can't give you the job. And you immediately sue me for discrimination. You say it's because you're a woman. Have you proved discrimination?
No. If you refuse the job to other women, this is not discrimination.
So you need to prove that either a bunch of women applied and I didn't take any of them, or I took a man who was not as qualified as you, or something. You can't just say it's discrimination because you have no actual proof of that at all. You must show there was some kind of discrimination. Now, in the case of the 4/5 rule, we're talking about discrimination against a group. So if my company is almost all white men and you sue me because you say, David, a lot of people apply for your company, women, people of color, minorities, a lot of people apply, and you only, out of all these people who've applied, you've only taken really mostly white men. Okay, that's a whole group. And by saying that, you've proven it. Then the employer, I have to now give evidence of business necessity or BFOQ. Okay, but you, the employee, still have to show that there's some kind of discrimination going on. You can't just say it's because I'm a woman. However, However, okay, so we all understand what you need to show as someone who's suing a company. We all understand the difference between business necessity and BFOQ, right? Business necessity is this essence of the business. And BFOQ is this quality of the person. You know, if my job is to hand out towels and you don't have any hands, okay, I don't hire you, right? Unless you want to say you're disabled and then I need to make an accommodation. So that's a bad example. But a BFOQ is if you simply can't physically do the job. You know, you're not tall enough, you're not strong enough, something like that. Now, the only situation, and I gave some examples of BFOQs, although some of these are actually, this is a business necessity. Business necessity, business necessity, business necessity, and this one's BFOQ. So it's not actually right. Now, there is one situation where if you just say it was discrimination, then it was. And that's in the case of sexual harassment. So if Chloe goes to the court or the government office and says there's sexual harassment, now there just is. I have to prove there isn't. It's not like discrimination. So let's talk a little about this, since I want to make sure we get this very clearly. So what would you do? Let me ask someone. Anais, what would you do if an employer told you, an employee, so you're HR, and an employee told you that her supervisor leered at her, looked at her very uncomfortably every time she entered his office? What would you say, Anais?
I would say it would be there would be an investigation into sexual harassment, into a sexual harassment claim against him.
Okay, sure. And yeah.
I don't know if action can be taken immediately after someone says that, you know, they've been there that or after.
Well, it depends. I mean, you certainly couldn't like fire the supervisor, but you could immediately have a meeting with the supervisor. You could call him into your office, you know, then that afternoon.
Okay.
You could take that kind of action. Ethan. Where's Ethan? Ethan, would this be different if you were HR and a man said his female supervisor leered at him every time he came in?
Unfortunately, in the real world, it is usually a little different. But no, sexual harassment is sexual harassment. If you don't feel comfortable from somebody, same gender or opposite gender, if you don't feel comfortable at work, then that's a problem, and that shouldn't be different.
Okay. Sure. Rodrigo, you start a Quai-D company. You understand what I mean, Quai-D?
Yes.
Delivery. And the delivery people, you choose them based on looks. Okay, nobody's really done that yet, so you've decided to make a attractive Quai-D company, which I think would be very successful in Shanghai, quite honestly. People would definitely pay a little bit more to have somebody knock at their door and have like a beautiful man or woman right there. And so you require the men to wear a suit and tie, and you require the women to wear a very short skirt and a tight blouse that shows their belly. And one woman complains that this sexually provocative uniform leads to many lewd comments by customers and coworkers, and she refuses to wear it. Can she be fired for this?
I would say yes, because it's like a business necessity.
Part of the company.
You would say it's a business necessity?
Yeah, if not, then like you said, it would be a really good business.
I think it'd be a very good business.
Yeah,
Chloe, do you agree?
Think about Hooters. If you don't want to wear the uniform at Hooters,
you don't
work there.
I understand, but I don't think that's the same as this example. Can someone tell me what the difference is?
I think
because they're
because of the comments.
Yes,
I know.
The situation of harassment.
Okay.
Is
At
it like
Hooters-
from outside of the
But it's
firm?
not Hooters though.
At Hooters, you don't have men who wear suits and ties. Would you say, Christopher, that a suit and a tie is comparable to a short skirt and a crop top?
Yeah.
Might look good.
You're talking
but
about my
not-
opinions personally. I think that for a woman it's similar.
A suit and a tie is formal.
Yeah,
That's
but it's
formal
about the-
attire.
I
A
think
short skirt and a
most-
crop top is sexy attire.
Comparable because you're asking, it's not comparable to Hooters because you're asking men to dress a certain way, women to dress in a different way that's more revealing.
Because the purpose is, what are the customers attracted to?
I think you make a legitimate argument. I would argue that if you want a woman to show skin, you would have to have men show skin as well. And if you wanted a
Yeah,
man
I
to
mean-
dress formally, you would ask a woman to dress formally as well.
Well, it's the same uniform for everyone, right?
Well, at least that it would be formal for everybody. You couldn't separate people and say for men it's formal, and for women you have to show skin. I don't think you could say that. I think this is an example of sexual harassment. So what is sexual harassment? Obviously, sexual harassment is protected by Title VII. It includes pretty much anything that makes a woman or a person, but typically, of course, a woman is what we're talking about, uncomfortable. So sexual harassment can happen during employment, obviously. It could happen before employment when there's a decision about who to hire, or during an interview, or during an advertisement phase, during recruitment. If you have an advertisement that says, you know, you must be whatever, tall, thin, look this way, have a chest this size, have whatever curves, all of that is sexual harassment potentially. And then anything in the work environment. Another condition of sexual harassment is that it's something related to submission. What we mean by submission is the idea that as a boss or a manager or someone, I would say, if you don't do this, dress this way, for example, then I won't give you a promotion, or you won't be hired, or you won't get money, or whatever. If you don't act this way, dress this way, talk this way. Could I tell a woman at work, you know, I need you to speak more feminine? What do you think, Camila? Could I tell a woman at work, listen, I need you to speak more feminine?
I think that goes to sexual harassment.
Sure.
'Cause that
That's
makes her feel
submission.
uncomfortable.
I'm telling you, you have to act a certain way, right? And that way is, so it doesn't have to be related. So we have this, you know, sexual harassment. It's not necessarily sexual. It's anything that is offensive. Is that offensive if I tell you to speak in a different way than you naturally speak? I'm sorry, who commented?
Yeah, of course. I think it's offensive to like to ask someone
For me to make any comment about how you speak, right? Unless I say, you know, Camila, please speak more clearly. That has nothing to do with anything. I could say that to anybody. But if I'm talking about how you speak and relating it to your gender, that's offensive. It doesn't matter if it's related to any sort of, you know, sexual or intimacy or anything like that, or dating, doesn't matter. It's anything that is offensive or hostile or intimidating. So sexual harassment is a very broad category, and it's a violation of Title VII if it interferes with work or creates any sort of, and these are the three key words I need you to know, intimidating, hostile, or offensive. Anything that is intimidating. What does intimidating mean?
Threatening.
Threatening, sure. Anytime someone feels threatened. Hostile is anytime someone feels judged. So I gave the example in the video of what if I have some pictures at my desk of swimsuit models? Is that offensive? Ethan, is that offensive?
Yeah, there'd be a large amount of people who would not rather not see that at work. They could be offended by it. Absolutely. Sure. You're objectifying a certain type of people.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so now the Civil Rights Act 1991 says if there is any sort of sexual harassment, you can collect compensatory and punitive damages, so you can get a lot of money. You know, and as you've seen, certainly in America, certainly with the Me Too movement, it is a dangerous thing because it's very easy to accuse someone. And it is almost impossible to defend yourself. And that's one of the dangers of this. You know, if I hire someone at my company and they accuse me of sexual harassment, there's almost nothing I can do to defend myself. It's very, very hard because it raises this presumption. You know, so if somebody sues me for discrimination, I can defend myself against that. But for sexual harassment, it's very hard. So we said there are two kinds, quid pro quo and hostile environment. Can you explain to me, how about Crystal, what is quid pro quo?
It is like you exchange conditions. Like if people reject your request, they will just have some tangible employment things.
Good,
Like
so it's exchange. That would kind of be the key word there, would be some sort of exchange. I give you this and you give me that, right? You go on a date with me and I give you a promotion. You, what if I said, Crystal, I want you in the company, where are you, Crystal? There you are. Okay, Crystal, in my company, you know, I think you're a good worker and I think I can give you a promotion, but you got to start wearing high heels.
If everybody is wearing, then no problem. But it's only me, then it's a special request to me to get the promotion.
Oh, so it's okay if I make all the women wear them?
All the women? No, unless it's necessary for the business.
Okay, well, it's not necessary for any business.
No,
I can't think of any business in the world where it is necessary for women to wear high heels.
Yes, like hotel front office, they are required to wear, like for some service job.
I wonder if they could say, I wonder if they could refuse. I bet they could. I'm sure they give in to the social pressure, but I don't believe for a second that the business requires them to wear uncomfortable shoes that are hard to walk in, that make their legs look better. Not for a minute is that a reasonable request. I think that is just something that has been done for a long time. But it's a quid pro quo. If I say, if you do this, then I'll do this. Hostile environment is anything else. Anything that makes someone uncomfortable, but it must have some sort of tangible consequences, right? So if you're uncomfortable at work and you go to HR and say, I'm uncomfortable, there must be some sort of consequence, like you got in trouble for saying that. You know, let's say that I have pictures on my desk and it makes one of you uncomfortable. And so you go to HR and then I come to you and I say, listen, did you complain about those pictures on my desk? Well, now I'm not going to give you a promotion. That's very hostile. You know, but just because you're uncomfortable and nothing happened, it's possible to sue for sexual harassment, but it would have to be something pretty significant. Just being a little bit uncomfortable maybe isn't enough. There has to be some sort of consequence.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, what if my boss talks about other females, like, for example, like say, oh, don't you think that girl is sexy or something, like sexy and look good? Then does it under the hostile environment or, right? Like,
well, I mean,
yeah.
Does it affect you? So if you said to the boss, sir, can you please not talk to me about that? And the boss says, ugh, come on. All right, Chandra, well then don't come to these meetings anymore. You can't handle it? Don't come to these meetings. We'll run these meetings without you. Now, that's a problem. You have now been excluded from a meeting because of something that you found uncomfortable. If you went to HR and said, listen, the boss constantly is talking about the girls he dates or what girls are pretty or showing me photos of girls and it makes me uncomfortable. And HR goes to the boss and says something, and then you find that the boss's behavior towards you is now different. Now something has changed. You know, but if you just say, this makes me uncomfortable, you still have a responsibility to go to HR and tell them. The boss deserves a chance to change his behavior. Now, of course, that's something that's an environment. If the boss did something very specific, for example, said, you're sexy, or I want to go on a date with you, or touched you, or something like that, that's different. That's already proven. You don't need to prove there's a consequence. He said it to you. He, you know, touched you. He told you to go on a date with him. That is the consequence right there. That has made the workplace into an unreasonable environment. You should never have to work with someone who says things like that to you. And absolutely, if the boss was showing you pictures of girls on his phone and saying, don't you think she's hot? That is making the workplace an unreasonable environment, no question.
There, would you say asking a coworker, you know, to go on a date is sexual harassment?
No.
Okay, yeah.
No, let's say that we're all working in an office and I say, hey, Chandra, you know, we seem to get along well. I was wondering if you wanted to go to dinner tonight or something along those lines. And if she says no, I have to accept that. Now, if I ask her every day, what if every single day, so I ask Chandra to dinner and she says no. And the next day, Chandra, you come to work and there's a rose on your desk. And and you say, David, did you give me a rose? And I say, I don't know, maybe. And every day I give you a rose. Is that sexual harassment? If it makes her uncomfortable, then it is. Sure. There's nothing wrong with dating at work, but you cannot make people uncomfortable. And she gets to decide when it's uncomfortable.
Oh, David, I have a question.
Yes.
What if, so just a situation, what if a boss, you know, gets with his secretary and let's say, I don't know, they're both married and then the boss says, I want to stop this. And then the secretary threatens to sue him for sexual harassment if he doesn't keep doing it with her.
You're throwing a bunch of crimes together. So first of all, that's adultery. So they're both guilty of adultery. And now she's using the crime of duress and threatening him and saying, if you don't do this, I will sue you for sexual harassment, which it clearly is not, because it was a consensual, albeit adulterous relationship.
Yeah.
Could she sue him for sexual harassment? She could. But all these facts
in situations like that.
I'm sorry?
Like what usually happens in that situation?
The boss would probably say, if you threaten me like that, then all of this is going to come out and I'll tell your husband.
But what is that what usually happens if he wants to protect his marriage too? I'm just wondering, like, who gets screwed in those situations?
Technically, both of them. But theoretically, he would probably pay her off.
Oh, okay.
Depending. I mean, that's what most likely would happen. This would be settled with a money transaction. If neither of them wants to go to court.
Yeah.
They would both get divorced if they went to court. Cheating on your husband or wife is absolute terms for divorce. And if he went to court and he cheated on his wife, she's going to get a significant portion of his money.
David, earlier you said that cheating was not illegal. I thought something like that, like it was against the law to be an adulterer.
It's not a crime, right?
To do
No,
what?
It's not good to be an
Wait,
adulterer.
adultery is a crime.
Really?
Yes, it's illegal. You have entered into a marriage contract. And that contract has certain terms. And if part of that is monogamy, and if you break that contract and are with someone else, then you've committed the crime of adultery. People don't usually go to jail for adultery. The result of adultery is that you get a divorce. And that's the punishment for adultery, is the person who accused you of adultery, if you did it, you get a divorce and they win the case, which means they're going to get some sort of compensation from you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if a person sleeps with somebody from like the HR department to get a job, but it was like consensual in order to get a job, is that sexual harassment?
If it's consensual, does it matter?
I mean, would it still be legal though?
Would it be
You still
legal?
sleep with like somebody with the power to give you a job. I mean, yeah, probably not, right? But
No, it's not legal. I mean, it's
just like how would that be persecuted? Or how would anybody know?
well, if it's consensual, it wouldn't be prosecuted. But let's say that I work in this company and I want to become the vice president. Okay, I've worked in this company for 10 years. And recently, the vice president job was open, and then another person, a woman, got the job. And I believe that she got the job by sleeping with somebody in the HR department. Now, she and this person in the HR department was consensual, so they don't have a problem with this, but I do. So I could sue the company for negligent hiring, that they hired her without good reason. And I would have to argue, you know, listen, I've been at this company for 10 years. I went to Harvard. I have all this experience. Look at my resume. I should have gotten that job. She got the job. And I asked the company and they won't tell me why she got the job. I think I know why. I think it's because of an illicit or unfair relationship. So, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Prove me wrong. Tell me why she got the job.
She can sue you if you keep saying that, though, right?
She can sue me for defamation, but truth is an absolute defense.
If it's not true, though, she can sue you.
Sure, but I'm not defaming her. I'm not saying anything bad about her. I'm suggesting she got the job through illicit means. Just prove she didn't. I'm not calling her bad names. I'm just saying I want to know why she got the job. That's it. So, and if you guys can't tell me why she got the job, then maybe she got it through an illicit means. And that could have included that it wasn't anything that was a relationship. It could have been that she was somebody's cousin or uncle or, aunt or mother or something, you know, that was nepotistic. Okay. What about this idea that we talked about in the video? If somebody in my company harasses someone, should I, the boss, be responsible?
Yeah.
Why?
If they came to you with it and you didn't do anything, yes.
Okay, sure, if I didn't do anything, but what if somebody was harassed and then they sue the company? And I didn't know, I just found out.
They never told you or told anyone?
Well, I mean, let's say somebody was harassed in my company and they tell their manager, okay, Ethan, you're the manager. So somebody got harassed and they go to Ethan, they say, Ethan, I got harassed. And Ethan, he's in HR and He does the process. He fills out the form. He brings the person into his office, whatever. But in this case, the woman truly was harassed, and I'm the owner of the company. Should I be part of this lawsuit? Should I have to pay? Am I responsible? Yes.
You
Why?
are responsible as the
Yes.
employer. Everybody under your kind of umbrella of influence payroll
Sure.
is you are.
Because I hired this person.
Yeah.
What about if it's by a vendor? Somebody we do business with?
Still.
Yes, if you knew or.
Bella, finish that thought. If I knew or.
Yeah, if you knew or should have known.
Correct.
And you didn't take any action.
Correct. So that's what I'm really looking for with this. If it's by a customer or a vendor, the question is, did the employer know or should have known that this sexual harassment took place? So if I knew that this customer always, says whatever dirty things, well, then I could be responsible as the employer. If I should have known, then I could be responsible as the employer. It doesn't matter if I know, it matters if I should have known. Anything else? So, okay, a couple of final notes, and we're almost done. So one, what is the responsibility of the employer? I'm responsible for acts of sexual harassment if they're committed by a manager, certainly, by an employee or a vendor or a customer if I knew or should have known. Now, if you're an employee and you feel that there was sexual harassment, what can you do? Number one, you would file a verbal complaint. If it doesn't stop, you can go to HR. You can file a verbal or a written report with HR. And if that doesn't work, you go to the EEOC. So those are really your three choices as an employee. There's actually number 4. You get a lawyer and you sue the company. Right? So you really have 4 things you could do. Number 4 would be get a lawyer, sue the company. These are the 4 things you can do as an employee. You can file a verbal complaint. You can file a report with HR. You can go to the EEOC, or you can sue the company. And in no circumstances can there be retaliation. So you can never get in trouble for filing these reports. That's about it. The only other thing to say is this note that I just said a minute ago, which is this idea of negligent hiring and retention. So negligence means that I hired someone for a bad reason. And what do you have to show? So a bad reason, it could have been that I didn't test this person. It could have been I didn't check their references. It could have been I didn't check if they went to school. It could have been I didn't do a criminal investigation. I didn't check their credit records or driving records. Or it could have been a quid pro quo, that they gave me something. They gave me money. They went on a date with me, whatever it is. If there's some reason that I was careless in the way I hired them. Now, in the example that Misha just gave, where I just got passed over for a promotion and I want to sue, I'm upset. So one, I have to show that this employee who got the job was unfit. Okay, that's this keyword here, unfit, right? She shouldn't have this job. Number 2, the reason that I am hurt is because she got the job. That caused my injury. What's my injury? I didn't get that job. And it's because of her. And number 3, the boss knew or should have known that this person was not fit for the job. So that's how I would sue or complain to HR about someone else getting a job that I should have gotten. If I want to say, listen, I think it was discrimination against me, now I could use Title VII, I could use the Civil Rights Act 1991. If it's about age, I can use the Age Act. If it's about disability, I can use the ADA or Pregnancy Act. If it's about gender, I can use the Equal Rights Act. I have lots of choices of different acts that I can use. But if somebody else got a job that I think I deserved, then I would prove these three things. Any questions? No? Okay, let me stop sharing. Okay, so what do I need you to do for next week? So for next week, I will put up the video very soon for part 3. I'd also like you to read chapter 3 in the, which one is it? So the chapter 3 that I want you to read is again, the one from the American Management Association. So chapter 3 is called The Employment Process. Now I will tell you, this week, and not every week, but this week, you will find that this chapter 3 is a little bit different from my PPTs. And the reason is, the PPTs are, they teach something which is about strategic HRM. And they don't teach that in this book, and I think it's important. So I want to talk about this, but the things that are in chapter 3, we're going to talk about later in the class in chapter 4 and 5 and stuff of my PPTs. So I still need you to read this if you can. You know, just try to go through it quickly. You know, I know it's a lot of information. At the very least, skim through the topics. You know, look at these bold topics and see what is this about. Read the topic sentence of each paragraph. If you can't read the whole thing, just read the topic sentences. I tend to read, you know, and highlight a lot, but just read the topic sentences if that's all you can do. So watch the videos, read chapter 3, and I think that's it. Any questions? Okay, next week we know who the presentation is, right? It'll be Nicola, Misha, and Jody. Okay, and then that's it. I will see you guys next week. As I did last week, let me transfer hosting control. Today I'll give it to Anais. Let me, how do I do this? Okay, Anais. Okay, Anais is now the host. So I will leave. You guys are welcome to talk about whatever amongst yourselves and just leave whenever you want. Cool? All right. I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.